A few months ago, Bill Gates posted a photo on LinkedIn of himself as a teenager in 1973 wearing a black robe at his high school graduation ceremony. He wrote that he'd been thinking a lot about the advice that he would give to his younger self. And he said, "My advice is simple. Read a lot and discover a skill you enjoy." It's crazy to think that the one piece of advice he would give to his younger self is simply to read more. In fact, when Times magazine asked him in 2017, "Do you think reading has been essential to your success?" his reply was, "Absolutely." But if you're reading and you're not actually taking on board that information, you could be completely wasting your time. What if there was a way to actually remember virtually everything you read? That's what we're going to cover in this video, the kind of strategies that Bill Gates himself uses to download all the knowledge he reads into his long-term memory. And do stick around until the end of the video where I give you a bonus strategy that is by far the single most important step. Without taking that step, everything else in this video is pretty much a complete waste of time. But let's start with the first method Bill Gates uses when reading, which is he takes notes in the margins. So Bill Gates talks about this quite often, that it's so important to actually be concentrating and processing what you're reading.
You know, when you're reading, you have to be careful that you really are concentrating.
And this is particularly important if it's a non-fiction book. Are you taking in the new knowledge and attaching it to knowledge you already have? And this process is known as elaborative rehearsal, which involves thinking about the meaning of the information and connecting it to other information already stored in memory. So by taking notes in the margin, you're forcing yourself to actually think about what you're reading. It's also extremely important if you're a student studying for your exams. So when you're reading, you should be asking questions, you're answering questions, you're writing down your own opinion. If you disagree with something the author writes, you write that down. In fact, it can take a long time for Bill Gates to actually finish a book if he disagrees with the author's perspective.
If I disagree with the book, sometimes it takes a long time to read the book because I'm writing so much in the margin. It's actually kind of frustrating. Oh, please say something I agree with so I can get through to the end of this.
Another interesting approach that Bill Gates takes when reading is that he chooses his books very carefully. And the reason for this is because once he starts a book, he makes sure he reads it to the very end. In 2017, he wrote in a Time magazine interview, "I refuse to stop reading a book in the middle, even if I don't like it." Meaning it's very important that if he's going to invest the next 5 to 8 hours reading a book, then it better be a good book. So Bill doesn't say you should complete a lousy book. Instead, he advises to decide carefully what you read before you start, being very intentional and strategic when considering whether a book is worth your time before you open it. And finishing every book you read doesn't mean you should force yourself through a bad book. Instead, pick carefully and then commit to complete the book. 1 hour deep reading sessions. Bill Gates reads in 1 hour deep reading chunks, and I'm going to add to this and recommend blocking out a 1 hour chunk in your day that you protect like you would a doctor's appointment, right? I think that's one of the biggest obstacles why most of us don't really read as often as we'd like, because life just gets too busy. But when you block out an hour of your day in advance, you're kind of protecting that time, right? But you're also ensuring that you spend enough time to actually make good progress through the book.
You'd want to be sitting down for an hour at a time, because otherwise just getting your mind around, okay, what was I reading? This is not the kind of thing you can do 5 minutes here, 10 minutes. And so, you know, every night I'm reading a little over an hour. And so I can take my current book and make some progress.
This next method is quite interesting because I've never heard anyone else mention this, but it totally makes sense. So Bill Gates recommends to create a broad framework. And what he means by this is essentially making sure you have broad background information before you read a book. So for example, if you're studying about American culture, for example, then it's probably a good idea to learn the history of America, how it was colonized back in the 1600s, and what countries it colonized after that, because the history of the country has a major influence on today's culture.
Have a broad framework, then you have a place to put everything. If you want to learn science, reading the history of scientists and the story of scientists about when they were confused and what tools or insights allowed them to make the progress they make. So you have the timeline, or you have the map, or you have the branches of science and what's known.
He goes on to mention that learning the background of what you're reading is so important to actually retaining new information in your long-term memory. And the more you read, the pieces of knowledge that you learn will fit into this bigger picture that you have of the subject area, and that picture of knowledge that you have in your memory will just continue to expand. Reading vacations. So Bill Gates is known for his once-in-a-year reading vacations. Forbes magazine wrote how one friend he went on holiday with said he doesn't just read one book, instead he'll read 5 books about it, most of which are too dense for any mortal to read. He almost always knows more than the other person he talks to. And when he was asked about his reading habits on vacation on a Reddit Ask Me Anything thread, he replied, "On vacation, I get to read about 3 hours a day, so I get through a lot of books." And I really like the idea of a reading vacation. It's so easy for us to get carried away with our work, our studying, just always striving towards our goals, yet we often forget to just take a step back and recharge. And a reading vacation where you just kind of spend most of the time reading and relaxing is the perfect antidote to a hectic, busy lives that we live. So it's this idea of what I call dual efficiency, where one activity brings together 2 major benefit components. So a reading vacation is of course massively beneficial to your mental health in terms of allowing you to recharge. So that's the first major benefit. The second major benefit is reading, which is important for brain development, career development, and becoming more knowledgeable. So essentially, by taking a reading vacation, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And Bill Gates' reading vacation is the most fun memorization strategy that he uses, but it's not the most important. The most important hack. Now, this isn't something that I learned from Bill Gates, but I know that he does it by the very fact that he's so successful, because if he didn't implement this one step, he would not be as successful as he is today. There's no doubt about it. So what is it? It's called execution. You can read as many books as you want. It's completely useless unless you actually take action.
Knowledge is not power. Anybody tells you that is full of it. Knowledge is potential power. The only real power is execution. Execution trumps knowledge every day of the week.
And this comes from personal experience too. I talk quite often about self-education on this channel, but I have fallen into that trap back in around 2013 to 2016 of just reading and consuming educational content and becoming relatively knowledgeable, but not actually doing anything about it or not executing on any of my plans. It wasn't until I started actually doing things, like I enrolled at university and implemented that knowledge I learned from reading books. I started a business and I implemented the knowledge I learned from reading books, and it was only then that my life started to change. I actually made a video recently similar to this called Train Yourself to Learn Like Einstein. It's basically a video like this, but the lessons on how Albert Einstein used learning strategies to implement self-learning. It's one of my favorite videos I've made on this channel. You can click on the video on the screen to watch that. Alternatively, I made another video called my #1 productivity hack, self-education. Again, you can click on the card on the screen, and whichever video you choose, I'll see you over there.